Not since Caligula used to hold court in the ancient Roman Empire. You'll remember that occasion when he declared his horse a proconsul of Rome. Has there been a two-dealer like the one Israeli president to give a pardon to the criminal Prime Minister of Israel, who hasn't even been convicted yet, but he's supposed to get a pardon on the orders of Donald Trump? The Arab members of the Knesset having been helpfully bundled out by brutal security guards for raising their voice whilst Trump was there in support of Palestinian statehood. But if the Knesset was a farce, the Sharm el-Sheikh summit was one of the most shameful spectaculars ever seen, and it was all seen and is now endlessly clipped and is being watched on a loop all over the world. The humiliation, the ritual degradation of Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, probably the most humiliated, the most degraded of all the leaders, ritually humiliated in Sharm el-Sheikh, was a laughingstock when he got home. And it showed in the exchanges in the British Parliament the next day. This man, so desperate to be of use, any use to the empire, in his increasingly useless government and increasingly decrepit and increasingly authoritarian state, was left completely shamefaced as he stepped forward, that fake smile on his face, only to be brutally ordered back to his place by Donald Trump, who couldn't even remember his name. But he wasn't the only one ritually humiliated. The royal visitor from the UAE, having been pulled and pushed in Trump's traditional macho manhandling handshake, had attention drawn to his shoes. "Wonderful shoes," said the President of the United States. "Your shoes are always so nice. So much cash. Unlimited cash you have." No one ever heard a president of the United States talk to a vassal like that, and moreover a vassal who's even more filthy rich than Miriam Adelson, to whose absolute servitude Trump pledged himself the day before in the Knesset. I'll come back to her, and I'll come back to the Knesset. The tough guy, Mr. Erdogan. How many times is Trump going to tell us how tough a guy Erdogan is? If he's that tough, why didn't he do anything whilst hundreds of thousands of Palestinians perished, were murdered and maimed in the Gaza Strip for 2 whole years? If he's such a tough guy, why didn't he do anything about that? That would have been a toughness worth seeing, worth something. But the prize, and I could go on, I mean, Macron was another one. He was pushed and pulled and tossed and turned like a little marionette, like a ventriloquist dummy. That's what he looked like. They're talking about nothing else in France than the humiliation of the French Republic by Donald Trump. But the prize, the biscuit, or whatever the Pakistani equivalent of a biscuit is, goes to the self-appointed Prime Minister of Pakistan. The real Prime Minister is, of course, behind bars in a dungeon at the hands of Trump's favorite field marshal. Couldn't remember his name either. So give my regards to my favorite field marshal. It reminded me of George W. Bush when he prayed in aid the support of the then Pakistani dictator, General Musharraf. He called him the general. The journalist asked, "What's the general's name?" And George W. Bush replied, "We just call him the general." Well, his favorite field marshal, Munir, and the self-appointed Prime Minister of Pakistan had recently been to Washington to get their marching orders and to beg for more financial aid. And I'm coming back to that point too. But he was the stooge who was put up by Trump to deliver a cringing, toe-curling panegyric to Donald Trump's greatness that left even Madame Meloni covering her mouth in horror. Such a servile, obescent, creeping, crawling display of servitude has never been seen before. You can be sure that Imran Khan would not have done that. That's why he's in prison, and why Shehbaz Sharif, who once upon a time I used to take tea with in the Edgware Road in London, not a bad fellow actually for a servant, exactly he proved to be at Sharm el-Sheikh. Much more seriously, it's turned out that Pakistan is now America's servant in ways that is beginning to make their longest and best friend, the People's Republic of China, distinctly nervous. But again, I'll come back to that. Before I do, I want to talk about Miriam Adelson. I confess I had never seen her picture before. I have seen pictures of the devil before. I have seen pictures of witches, hubble bubble, toil and trouble. I have seen Macbeth, but I've never seen anything like Miriam Adelson. Neither had I any idea just how filthy rich this woman is. Trump, in front of her, told the entire world that she has $60 billion in her bank account, which explains why Donald was on his knees. I mean, Donald spent a life with the woman being on her knees, but he is on his knees to Miriam Adelson. He told the world that in exchange for a tiny fraction of her 60 billion, I may say he could have driven a better bargain. If I'd been driving it, I'd have got far more out of her for what you gave her, Donald. You gave her and her husband, now deceased, casino owners in Las Vegas. How classy is that? You gave her the removal of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, illegally occupied Jerusalem, by your own law, and you declared against your own law that Jerusalem was the eternal capital of Israel, which of course legally it is not and never ever will be. But you did that when, as you say, no American president had ever done that before. That would have been worth the money she gave you on its own, but what else did you tell the world that you gave her? The Golan Heights, which by your own law does not belong to Israel, is illegally occupied territory belonging to Syria. Resolution 242, Resolution 338, and your own law declares that the Golan Heights is not in Israel, but you, in return for a few $100 million, a mere bagatelle to her 60 billion, you recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and they put up an ugly, vulgar block of flats and called it Trump Tower in your honor in the Golan Heights. You told the world that her and her husband were the most frequent visitors to the White House, though they hold no official position of any kind and never have. We know what they were doing there, Donald. They were giving you cash, probably much of it in brown envelopes, if I'm a judge of your conduct and theirs. Maybe in casino chips. Maybe they fed you high-value casino chips to play with in Las Vegas. You didn't divulge that, but that's my surmise. You gave them everything they asked for. You gave them unlimited access to the Oval Office in your first and now in your second term. And you did it for the grubbiest of marked dollar bills. And even more extraordinarily, you told the world that that's exactly what you did. Now, let me go back to Pakistan. It's a well-known truism that when two global South countries start a war with each other, that one of them has just been to Washington, or that Washington has just been to one of them. The peals of laughter over Shehbaz Sharif's speech at Sharm el-Sheikh were still ringing in everybody's ears when full-scale war, including the Afghan capital, Kabul, burst into flames as rockets and bombs and missiles flew between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The head of intelligence of the Taliban, I know it sounds like a contradiction, he is dead. And a cell of Pakistani intelligence was immediately hit in return and set on fire, and we don't know who was killed in that. But hundreds have now died in a war between the neighbors, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Why? For what purpose? For what reason? I'll tell you what the reason is. Bagram Air Base. You remember, late one night, over the last couple of weeks, Trump announced, apropos nothing, that he wanted Bagram Air Base back again. He said back again, but actually the Russians built it in the 1950s. But Donald doesn't know that kind of detail. He said give Bagram back to those who built it. He didn't mean the Kremlin. He meant the United States of America. To be sure, Bagram, a torture chamber when the Americans were there, where illegally rendered people were plunged into black prisons and tortured, oftentimes to death. It's a shameful piece of American-owned architecture. It's shameful for another reason for people like Trump, because when the United States left Afghanistan like a thief in the night in Joe Biden's presidency, they stole away in the middle of the night, leaving hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weaponry and war materiel. And the United States military and its securocratic three-letter agencies have never recovered from the ignominy of their retreat from Afghanistan. So we've got a regime change operation on our hands. But here's the complication. China has extremely good relations with the Taliban and has the best relations that any two countries could ever have with Pakistan. Now that Pakistan is doing Donald Trump's bidding, when they take their collective national tongue out of Donald Trump's crack, what's going to happen in the mutually exclusive business of one of China's allies trying to destroy and overthrow? They've already occupied, they say, 10% of Afghanistan in a single day, and they are bombarding the capital, Kabul. What's going to happen? How is China going to manage that conundrum? Well, Gayatri and I are on our way to China. We'll be there in the next couple of days. I hope to be able to report further and better on that subject in due course. But that's not the only cause of anxiety. I spoke to you the other night about China's total domination on the processing of rare earth materials, which accounts for something like 90% or more of the world's processed rare earth materials. It's a big card. It's a powerful card. It's a card that China has and Donald Trump does not have. And so the US is on a desperate scramble for ways that they can circumvent China's domination of the rare earth markets. Guess where they've fastened on as the most likely of the conduits which under Pakistan, the patsy of Sharm el-Sheikh. Much more coming up. It's the mother of all talk shows.